Give us an example of race discrimination cases that have also been dismissed by via summary judgment.
Yeah, there is a racial harassment case that was dismissed that has some pretty terrible facts that involve things like on a console they had a KKK on a bathroom wall and a block saw console. A supervisor said that if he looked at a white girl, he would cut him. Another supervisor called him black boy. There were rebel flags on toolboxes and hard hats. And that's just some of what it was alleged, and that was dismissed. That case was dismissed, and that wasn't racial harassment. It's hard not to laugh. So that's another harassment case. There's just story after story of harassment cases, racial discrimination cases, sexual discrimination cases, retaliation cases where someone complains about discrimination and then is retaliated against for complaining about discrimination. That these cases are being dismissed.
All right, so you talk about a number of legal doctrines that end up like doing the heavy lifting, I guess, in these instances, right? That provide the justification for summary judgment.
Sure.
Tell us about a couple of them. I know whether it's stray remarks or the honest belief rule, or McDonnell Douglas, or whatever you think is most relevant for people to understand, because I'm not sure that people fully understand sort of like what judges have at their disposal in terms of like a toolbox in which to make these rulings.
Sure. I'll start with just one of them, the stray remarks doctrine. The idea here is that if a discriminatory remark is made too remote in time from the decision, or not made in the context of the decision, or it's too ambiguous, that the court will say it's a stray remark, there's no evidence of discrimination, case dismissed. And so there was a case involving a middle school teacher and a coach of the football team. And when he was hired, the superintendent, he was black, the superintendent said when he was hired that they had a problem in the past with black coaches, and if there was another problem, no matter what it was, that he'd do his best to get rid of this employee. And in the same conversation, the supervisor said he had had bad luck with black men working in the town. And so there were, he was hired. There were some complaints against the person who was hired, and then the superintendent made the recommendation of not renewing the contract. And it wasn't accepted by the board originally, but then later on it was accepted, and the position was filled by a white female. And what the court said was that, giving the overwhelming evidence that supported their legitimate justification, these comments can just be viewed as mere stray remarks. And so it's sort of like, okay, here you have these comments that are made by a guy who clearly has some, issues with discriminating against people who are black. And then this guy is recommended to be fired, and he is fired, and they say that's irrelevant. And, there were enough good justifications. Well, you can't really put the justifications into context unless you look at those comments, I think. And so that's one of the doctrines that gets used to say this case doesn't go to a jury. Now, again, what my co-author and I always say is, we're not saying there's discrimination. What we're saying is this case should go to a jury, and a judge shouldn't be deciding whether or not this case gets dismissed. Another doctrine that's used is something called the same or common actor inference. And the idea there is that if someone hires you and then they fire you, the same person fires you, they didn't discriminate when they hired you, so they can't discriminate when they fired you. So there was this guy who worked for a company, and the CEO hired him, and then the CEO made a number of age-related comments like, you don't need to be remarrying a young woman again, you can't even get it up. He called him an old goat, said you can't remember, you're just getting old. He told him that senility was setting in. And he had this evidence of discrimination by this CEO. But despite that, they said, he hired this person, and so he can't have discrimination. He couldn't have discriminated against him because he hired him. Well, the funny thing about this, I don't know if people might have seen this connection, but the funny thing about this is it's very inconsistent with the stray remarks doctrine, because stray remarks doctrine is saying you have discrimination at point A, but you do not have discrimination at point B by that same person. This other inference is saying you have no discrimination at the first point, and then you don't have discrimination at the second point, that the no discrimination doesn't disappear. So it's the Seventh Circuit, one of the federal circuit courts, has said, this doesn't quite make sense. These doctrines don't, really make sense together. So there is some recognition, but that some of this doesn't make a lot of sense.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos